nation ever experienced, yet it provoked the least bloodshed. It was the Cold War, a 45-year period of tensions between the U.S. and the USSR. Yet, it took until the presidency of Ronald Reagan to alleviate these tensions and close the book on what was the Cold War. Reagan's presidency from 1981 to 1989 fostered the policy of peace through strength, and through his negotiations with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, he was able to contribute to the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, which consisted of the Baltic states of Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, as well as Armenia, Georgia, Moldova, East Germany, Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Poland, Hungary, Romania, and Russia, would be liberated from communism by 1991. The question is, what did Reagan do differently than his predecessors? No doubt, his Reagan Doctrine and implementation of the Strategic Defense Initiative were used as a means of intimidating the Soviet Union. The Gorbachev factor and his reforms of the Soviet Union economy, such as Glasnost and Perestroika, also played a part. However, nothing stood out more than Reagan's persistence and optimistic outlook on eliminating the threat of nuclear war. PBS interviewer Charlie Rose had a chance to sit down with Ronald Reagan to reflect on his role in the Cold War's termination before Reagan sadly passed away on June 5, 2004.
From our studios in New York City, this is Charlie Rose.
I'm Charlie Rose for Channel 13, interviewing former U.S. President Ronald Reagan.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me on your show.
Mr. Reagan, after first ascending to the presidency, how did you feel about the Soviet Union?
Well, after witnessing the actions of its government in the past decades, I became convinced that it was an evil empire. The two things that most troubled me in the Soviet Union were the complete absence of religion or any belief in God, and basic human civil liberties. As a result, I became convinced that the United States can only defeat communism in the world not by numbers of nuclear missiles, but by maintaining the God-loving and freedom-loving attitudes that make us the greatest nation in the world.
What changes did you implement in the military during your first term in office?
I greatly increased the nation's military spending, as I felt this to be the most expedient means of achieving my goal of peace through strength. I presented this policy to the American people in my first inaugural address with the words, "Above all, we must realize that no arsenal, no weapon in the arsenals of the world is so formidable as the will and moral courage of free men and women."
Did you feel that your economic program would put pressure on the Soviet Union to match the efficiency of the United States?
I have always felt that freedom is the strongest possible antidote to tyranny and totalitarianism. Therefore, by relinquishing control of how and where American consumers and businessmen spend their money and lowering taxes for all Americans, my administration advanced both the political and economic freedoms of the American people. In hindsight, I think that the people of the Soviet Union, who had been oppressed for many years by their massively powerful central government, could no longer compete with the people of the United States, who were harnessing the productivity and freedom which we had helped them to attain.
How did you expect your support of Afghanistan's Mujahideen to rub off on the Soviet Union?
Well, Charlie, although success in Afghanistan was far from assured, containing communism at any time and anywhere in the world is a very noble proposition that I would have looked favorably upon. With the move that you just mentioned, we forced the already stagnant Soviet economy to expend even more money and resources for the sake of maintaining the spread of communist control in the world, straining it all the way to its breaking point.
What would you say were the specific actions by Mikhail Gorbachev that forced you to adjust some of your positions on the Soviet Union?
Gorbachev's implementation of glasnost and perestroika allowed for monumental changes, which made economic, political, and religious freedoms more widely available in the Soviet Union and its republics. Consequently, I was more apt to negotiate with him on matters of national security and defense as concerned our respective nations.
What were some of the reasons for your inability to reach a nuclear arms agreement with Gorbachev at Reykjavik?
Main point of contention between us was that Gorbachev was utterly unwilling to allow the U.S. to keep a system of defense for itself. Gorbachev asked me to terminate the testing of nuclear weapons in space, which was a fundamental aspect of my Strategic Defense Initiative plan. Therefore, I could not accept his request, and we were unable to reach any agreement at that time.
In hindsight, which of the other world leaders during your presidency helped you achieve the rapid collapse of the communist evil empire of the Soviet Union?
Though we did not always see eye to eye, it goes without saying that in the absence of Mikhail Gorbachev, the Cold War could have quickly turned very hot. He was the first Soviet leader in decades to respond more or less warmly to my attempts at negotiations and the reductions of certain types of nuclear armaments. He made the Soviet Union far less evil than ever before by initiating reforms that favored democracy, religion, and the privatization of at least certain sectors of the economy. Its moral standing in the world was significantly raised by all of the aforementioned changes, but its swift collapse as a broad, all-embodying entity of 15 republics was caused by the democratization that I have mentioned earlier. With the currents of freedom unleashed, people throughout Eastern Europe seized the moment and began a monumental struggle against the oppressive ways of the Soviet army and government, finally releasing the decade-old stranglehold.
Mr. Reagan, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, and glad to be here.
And now, a special tribute to Ronald Reagan and America's victory in the Cold War.
People, today we utter no prayer more fervently than the ancient prayer for peace on earth. Yet history has shown that peace does not come, nor will our freedom be preserved, by goodwill alone. There are those in the world who scorn our vision of human dignity and freedom. One nation, the Soviet Union, has conducted the greatest military buildup in the history of man, building arsenals of awesome offensive weapons. We've made progress in restoring our defense capability, but much remains to be done. There must be no wavering by us, nor any doubts by others, that America will meet her responsibilities to remain free, secure, and at peace.